Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody can hear me. It's always a little bit awkward to be moderating these sessions virtually without having an in-person audience. I can see that we have 19 participants in total. So I believe that more people will join, but I would like to start this session in time. So then obviously we do not hamper or reduce the time allocated for the speakers. So welcome to this session. It is about user behavior in transport and mobility. Today we have some housekeeping rules. I believe that everybody is already familiar with this. I hope that that is the case. Perhaps the most important things for everybody is that the audio and camera should be mostly used by the speakers. I will do my best to keep my interventions as sharp and quick as and short as possible. But the audio and web camera is mostly for the speakers. Then the Q&A, I believe that everybody is also familiar with this. We will use the chat function to do so. I will do then my best to transfer those questions to our respective speakers. And then I hope that everybody has the latest version of Zoom, so then you can have access to all the functionalities in there. I also understand that this session has been recorded, so just this material will be then available on the conference website. So now let's go to the most important and interesting part. So today, as some of you know, we have 4 fantastic and very interesting presentations. We will have Uta Burghard talking about sharing vehicles or sharing rides. What influences the acceptance of shared mobility services in Germany? Then we will have Maria Lagomarsino speaking about choice architecture designed and whether this affects or not. We will get to know this from Maria. Preferences for electric vehicle smart charging. After Maria, we will have Dorothea Schaffner posing the question, buying green cars and exploring the determinants of purchase intention for energy efficient cars in Switzerland. And finally, we will have Jon and Magnus Roos talking about the determinants of car sharing self-efficacy. He will explain, obviously, all these concepts, and to the best of my knowledge, that particular case is in Sweden. So it's quite European in many respects. So we have Uta in Germany, we have Maria, to the best of my recollection, that case study is in the UK. Then we have Dorothea in Switzerland, and then finally Jon having that case study in Sweden. So it's quite European oriented. All the topics, I believe, are quite suitable and rather interesting for this dedicated session on transport and mobility. So now I will stop sharing my screen, and I would like to introduce Uta, who will be our first speaker. Uta studied social science and psychology at the universities of Mannheim, Gießen, and Brussels. She specializes in microsociology and also provides consulting and advisory services. Since 2011, Uta has been a researcher and project manager in the Competence Center for Energy Technology and Energy Systems at the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany. She finished her PhD at Leuphana University in Lüneburg in 2016. Her PhD topic was on norms and guiding principles related to cars and electric mobility in families. And her research work focuses on social acceptance of the energy system transformation, qualitative and quantitative methods, and the interface between acceptance and innovation research. Uta, the virtual floor is all yours. Welcome, and thank you for your contribution to this session.
Thank you very much, Luis, for this nice introduction. I hope now everyone can see my screen. If not, please give me a short note, but I think it works now. Yeah, okay, thank you very much. So the title of my presentation today is sharing vehicles or sharing rides would influence the acceptance of shared mobility services in Germany. And this research was part of a project called Profilige Mobilitätssysteme Karlsruhe. So this is a large project located in Karlsruhe with the aim to link and network the different stakeholders in the field of mobility research. And I did this research together with my colleague Aline Scherer. So to make transport more sustainable, shared mobility might be one possible solution. So shared mobility is defined as different transportation modes that are shared on as needed basis. So examples are car sharing, so this is the most established one. Then we have bike sharing or e-scooter sharing. And in this presentation, I will focus on car sharing. And the second service is ride pooling, so a rather new service. I guess for car sharing, there's no introduction necessary. I hope everyone has at least heard of this service already. However, there's maybe just to note that there's a difference between the station-based services where you have fixed stations where you can pick up and return the car, and then you have free-floating services where the cars are distributed in a certain in the city, like for example, e-scooter sharing, they're similar. You can just leave the vehicles wherever you want. And for ride pooling, maybe I will give you some more information because this is a quite new service, at least in Germany. So often there are small buses that are used in large or in major cities by now. They can be booked via an app. So in these buses, they are used by multiple passengers simultaneously, and they do not know each other. And the system uses an algorithm that automatically forms carpools between these passengers. They have similar destinations. The providers of ride pooling often have commercial interest. So this is in contrast to ride sharing. So ride sharing is the more these forms that are non-commercial, like for example, sharing private rides or private carpooling. In Germany, providers of ride pooling in the moment, there are private companies, but also like municipalities. However, the legal situation in Germany is a little bit complicated for this service in the moment, and sometimes you have different legal situations in different cities or different municipalities. And for this study, we looked at the influencing factors on the acceptance of shared mobility, these two services, as I mentioned before. So to play out the advantage of shared mobility services, it is crucial that there's a wide adoption of these services. So it's important to look at the social acceptance of these services. And here we look at car sharing and ride pooling, so a more established service versus a recently introduced sharing system or sharing service in Germany. So both are car-based systems, and both can maybe substitute a car or decrease car ownership overall. However, car sharing is already available in many cities in Germany, and it's a widely known service in Germany, whereas ride pooling is rather new and is only available in large cities. And this service is more similar to public transport or taxi. Here we focus on psychological factors in relation to the acceptance, because these factors have hardly been studied so far. So we were interested especially in the relevance of these psychological factors. So our research question is, what influences the acceptance of car sharing and ride pooling, and to what extent does the acceptance of the two mobility services differ? For the theory and the study model, we used the diffusion of innovation theory by Everett Rogers. So the assumption is that individual adoption decisions are influenced by the perceived attributes of the innovation. And Rogers identified five of these attributes. So they are called relative advantages, compatibility, complexity or ease of use, trialability, and observability. And we defined a conceptual model for our analysis. So in this model, we assumed sequential relationships between more basic dispositions. So we used environmental identity and routine seeking. I will introduce the items later on. And we used these individual perceived attributes in the DOI concept by Rogers. So the five factors, as I mentioned before. And then we used a general attitude and acceptance of the innovation. In this case, car sharing and ride pooling. We assume positive relationships between the variables, except from routine seeking, where we expect a more negative influence. So that is, the more routine-oriented a person is, the less likely he or she is to use car sharing or ride pooling. So here you see the conceptual model for our analysis, or the study model. And this is the model we assume beforehand, before we start the analysis. Now I will introduce the measures and the methodology of this study. And I will later on explain more in detail the variables we used. The data was derived from a big online survey in German major cities, so German cities with more than 100,000 inhabitants. The sample is a little bit more than 3,000 respondents. And these respondents were randomly assigned to 4 representative subsamples. These subsamples, according to 4 shared mobility service, car sharing, ride pooling, bike sharing, e-scooter sharing, but for this analysis we only used car sharing and ride pooling samples. So in each sample, 1 mobility service was introduced to the participants, and afterwards the participant had to evaluate this service. The participants were randomly assigned to this subsample, as I mentioned before, and the samples were quoted to be representative of the population in the selected city categories according to region, level of education, and age gender category. For the introduction of the services, because we assumed that not everyone might already know this service, so we used short introductory or short descriptive text and a picture to introduce the services to the respondents, and then afterwards there were some questions to evaluate the services. For the measures, as I mentioned before, in our initial model, we used the acceptance as a dependent variable, so this was defined as the actual and also the intended use of the services. Then we used the general attitudes towards the services. Then we had the more basic dispositions, like as I mentioned before, like environmental identity and routine seeking. And then we included the 3 of the Rogers constructs, that is compatibility with the values, experiences, and needs of an individual. Then the triability, so this is defined as the possibility to test the innovation before the decision to adopt. And then the complexity or ease of use of the service. So this is the difficulty or the perceived difficulty to understand and use the innovation. Not all, as you might see, not all Rogers constructs were used in our model because some of them didn't. Some of them, the Cronbach's alpha didn't work for the scales, and some were excluded due to problems in earlier studies. So these were the relative advantage. For the other constructs, the item aggregation on scales based on the item aggregation was based on scales. The item aggregation was done based on scales by the explorative factor analysis and also estimations of Cronbach's alpha, as I mentioned before. So this led to the expected 1-factor solution for all constructs that are mentioned here. So these are the measures, and last but not least, the data analysis. So we use path analysis with a maximum likelihood as an estimation method, and that's why I introduced this initial model on the slide before. And we tested this initial model with the R package, with the package Lavan from the R program. So with this program, we tested the model and we calculated the fit indices, and also direct and indirect effects are calculated. So for the results, first I will present the descriptive statistics. So you can see the acceptance was used as a dependent variable. So car sharing was evaluated slightly more positive compared to ride pooling. Remember, acceptance is defined as the actual use, but also the intended use. But we see higher standard deviations for car sharing compared to ride pooling. SD is for means standard deviation. Then for the attitude, the general attitude, correspondingly, we find a slightly more positive attitude for car sharing. Again, a higher variance for car sharing also. For the compatibility, we see car sharing and ride pooling are perceived very similarly in terms of mean and also standard deviation. For ease of use, this is more positive for car sharing compared to ride pooling, maybe because this service is more known to the respondents beforehand, or maybe they expect it easy, to be easier to use compared to ride pooling. Because we also see more users, more like actual users for car sharing compared to ride pooling. For trialability is also more positive for car sharing, maybe because again this service is more widespread. Routine seeking and environmental identity are quite similar because these items were used or were asked to the whole sample, and we expected these might be the means are quite similar because all samples are to be representative for the population. Then the final model for car sharing. So what influences the acceptance of car sharing? This is the path model for car sharing. So most paths are significant and also in the expected directions. We had to modify the initial model. So we removed some insignificant paths and we added some regression paths that were suggested by the modification indices. And we received a quite good model fit. As you can see, the path between compatibility and general attitude has the largest positive standardized path coefficient compared to all other paths, followed by the path between compatibility and acceptance. You can also see that there's a positive effect of general attitude on the acceptance, and you also see that trialability and ease of use also have positive impacts on the general attitude. For the more basic disposition, environmental identity, we see positive effects on compatibility and ease of use in the car sharing model, but a weak negative impact on the acceptance. And for the routine seeking factor, we see, as expected, a negative influence on the ease of use and the acceptance. However, there is a positive effect on compatibility. Last but not least, the path model for ride pooling. Again, this model is similar to the car sharing model. However, there are some differences. But what is similar, we have again the path between compatibility and general attitude shows again the largest positive standardized path coefficient, followed by the path between compatibility and acceptance. This is similar like in the car sharing model. And also that the general attitude has a positive effect on the acceptance. Also similar is that the Rogers variables in the middle, like trialability and ease of use, show positive impacts on general attitude. However, the effect of ease of use for ride pooling is weaker compared to the car sharing model. Environmental identity has a positive influence on all Rogers variables and also on general attitude, but not on acceptance. And for the routine seeking factor, we see again a negative influence on the ease of use and the acceptance, and also the general attitude in this model. Yeah, that's it for this model. So I will now, on my last slide, I will give a summary and discuss my findings. So we can see in our models that the psychological variables in the model can predict whether or not an individual uses or intends to use car sharing or ride pooling. So most correlations were in the expected directions. We included additional paths from the more basic values or more basic dispositions like environmental identity and routine seeking to attitude and acceptance. For the relevance of the environmental identity, we see mixed effects. So the effects in the ride pooling model are quite clear. So positive effect of environmental identity on acceptance. However, the effects for car sharing are a little bit more complex. So one possible reason might be that these individuals, more or maybe environmental friendly individual might reject motorized individual transport as such, and that's why they reject car sharing. Also, this might be one reason for these effects. And for routine seeking, we've seen that it negatively influences some of the Rogers constructs and also attitude and acceptance. However, we've also seen that for car sharing, routine seeking shows positive effect on compatibility. So maybe for car sharing, routine behavior might not be detrimental for car sharing usage or car sharing acceptance, and these individuals could still be reached by such a service. And another reason also might be that ride pooling is a quite new service, so this cannot be observed, or for many respondents it's quite new, they've never seen this service before. And also another reason also might be maybe that car sharing cars can be used similar to a private car, like in cities where you have a high density of car sharing and very much or many stations for car sharing, then the usage might be quite similar to a private car. So this might be routine-driven behavior or nearly routine-driven behavior. Our findings provide hints towards the aspects that can be influenced to change the attitudes towards the sharing services and also the usage. For example, trialability, this variable can be influenced based on the availability of the services. To be further analyzed, so we have to calculate direct and indirect effects. So in the moment we are writing the paper, so we will look deeper into these direct and indirect effects of all variables on acceptance. And then we will also look deeper in the compatibility variable. So this is a variable that's often quite influential in several studies, also in studies we've done before. And now it's interesting to really understand how the respondents interpret it, what does it mean for the respondents exactly. And maybe in further studies, it also could be differentiated between the station-based services and these free-floating car sharing systems. This might again be linked to the relevance of the routine-seeking variable. Yeah, so that's it from my. Oh, sorry. That's it from my side. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to any questions of you.
Thank you, Uta, on behalf of everybody. Thank you for your contributions. Now it is time for our audience to use the chat function to ask questions. I don't see any question, at least on my screen yet. Maybe Uta, in the meantime, I can ask you one very simple question. It was quite interesting when looking at the descriptive statistics. I noticed that the acceptance was relatively below 3 from a scale from 1 to 6.
Yeah.
Would it be possible then to argue that the perceived level of acceptance is, you might say, medium or relatively low, particularly if one factors the environmental identity effects that you mentioned later on in the conclusions?
Sorry, I'm not sure if I get your question right. So the level of acceptance
is relatively low in your case, particularly if we then factor the environmental identity that it seems to have a very strong values in your descriptive statistics, and also some negative effects. I think that you mentioned that very clearly for the car sharing case, if my memory is correct.
Yeah, for environmental identity, there are also quite big social desirability effects, I assume, because if you post this question, you always receive quite high ratings because everyone says, okay, the environment is important to me. Maybe this might be one reason. And then for the acceptance, I agree. It's quite it's not very low, but it's not even high. So it's more like in the neutral range of the scale. But remember, this variable is an index, so this includes all participants already using them. So they were, I think they have the value of 6. And then you have the intention to use. So all participants who are not yet users, they were asked if they intend to use the service in the future. So, as we have, if we cannot see many users, you might expect this because car sharing, again, is still in a niche in Germany, even if so many people already know it, but it's still a niche. So you have not that many users. I think it's in our sample, it's 10% or 12%. And for ride pooling, it's even less. And for the population, you have to remember these are persons from major cities, so persons in which these services might be available and they might have seen these services. But again, the intention to use is still not that high. So yeah.
Thank you, Uta, for your answer. I see one question from Jon. It says, your conclusion is that the relationship between environmental identity and car sharing is complex. Is it not better to state that it seems to not be there, the relationship, according to your data?
You mean not be there, the relationship
between environmental identity and car sharing? That is how I read his question.
Yeah. Yes. The studies are not very clear. Also, if you look at the literature on car sharing, it is, in some studies, it is influential, and some is not. So maybe it's getting less important the more the service is spreading. Maybe also financial reasons might play a role, so that you can substitute your own car, you have less cost, and also you have all these you have less effort compared to having a private car. So this reason might be becoming more important when the services are getting more widespread in cities. So I agree that environmental identity might play a role, but not the most important one for car sharing.
Thank you, Uta, for your answer. We have another question from Dorothea. Dorothea asks, have you considered to segment different user types or target groups?
Yeah, this is as we've used these subsamples. So we have also, that's why I have these two path models, because these are separated samples. We, in another analysis, which is in the moment master thesis, we look at clusters for different customer segments in the sample of car sharing and in the sample of ride pooling. So we look at different consumer segments, so mostly based on socio-demographic variables and also variables related to mobility resources, like, for example, availability of a car. But in this study here, we more focused on the psychological side, because many studies neglected this or they haven't looked at psychological variables, but more focused on socio-demographics. So in this study, we wanted to really look at these psychological variables. But it's another idea to we can do this maybe in our further analysis to segment different subgroups. So my colleague Elisabeth, she has done this with the Rogers, again with the Rogers model, so to identify early adopters. So these are persons who are already using an innovation or first movers. So this is the typological by Rogers. Then you have early majority, late majority, and also the laggards. So you can define these different groups based on their intention to adopt an innovation. So maybe we can look at this later on. But in the moment, this was more the focus, like the influencing factors on the acceptance.
Magnus asked a kind of follow-up question, in my understanding, is whether in this segmentation, are you considering or planning to include personality traits?
We did not ask for personality trait as such. If you refer to like the big five or so, I'm not sure. We did not ask for this. So we started with the environmental identity and also the routine seeking. So we did not ask for further personality traits in our survey. So we cannot include them in further analysis.
Thank you, Uta. One final thing that I just wanted to share with you, because it got really my attention about this complementarity in your conclusion. In Sweden, we have done a study on the impact of social norms, and it's quite interesting because we found that perceived complementarities between car sharing and public transport and active mobility seem to play a really, really important and significant role. But you are right, like, how do we interpret these complementarities? What do people think when they perceive that there is a high, low, medium, whatever scale you use in terms of complementarity between car sharing or ride pooling in your case with other forms of transport? And for us, that is a big question mark. We don't really know. And I got the feeling that you're also interested in pursuing that line of research.
That's interesting, but in this Rogers variable, it's compatibility with the values and the needs of an individual. But I agree that the complementarity is also important, because also for ride pooling, this is a service which is more similar to public transport services. So it's again, it might be in further studies, it might be interesting to look at these complementarity with different transport modes, like how to combine it with different transport modes, and how are the affinity between different sharing modes or transport modes, is it correlated? Maybe this is interesting, yeah.
Super. Thank you, Uta. Thank you very much for your presentation and again contribution to this session. I think that now it is time to move on to our next speaker. Thank you, Uta, again.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Maria Lagomarsino. She will be talking about choice architecture design and whether this affects preferences for electric vehicle smart charging. Just a short introduction about Maria. Maria is a postdoctoral researcher at the Consumer Decision and Sustainable Behavior Lab at the University of Geneva in Switzerland. She is currently conducting research in understanding individuals' preferences for renewable energy and energy-efficient technologies. Her project is very interdisciplinary in nature, where psychology, marketeers, and engineers work together or in collaboration with local utilities. Maria's research focuses on environmental and societal well-being, policy practices, social marketing, health communication, emotions, and of course, consumer psychology. Maria, the virtual floor is yours. Thank you very much for your contribution to this session.
Thank you, Luis, for the nice introduction. And I'm very happy to be here presenting my research done in collaborations with my colleagues Ulf, Mart, David from the University of Geneva. This work aims at understanding how individuals use smart charging system, but let me give you a little bit of context. You know better than me that the diffusion of electric cars is amongst the priority of energy transition strategy around the world. However, the increasing diffusion of EV can severely challenge hosting capacity of the existing distribution grid. More EV there are around, more energy demands, and the systems is not yet equipped for it, at least with the conventional charging system. So with these conventional, so the uncoordinated charging system, which are the most commonly used technology nowadays, the charging process starts as soon as the car are plugging in, and it takes between 20 minutes or 8 hours depending on the charger type. These systems imply no coordination on when EV are charged, which is problematic as EV are often charged during electricity demand peaks, such as in the early evening when people come back home from work. These additional loads cause stress on the electricity grid as existing demand peak become intensified. So you can imagine that with the diffusion of EV, that would be even worse. The technological literature suggests that smart charging is a promising solution to secure the grid stability and or increase renewable energy use. Smart charging refers to new coordinated charging system, meaning that the charging station communicates vehicle data to the charging operator and the utility company. When smart option is selected by the user, the data are used to define a charging schedule that optimize the charging process according to the owner preferences. The system, this means that the systems modulate the charging process by lowering the charging speed or delaying the charge. The idea is that doing so allows the charging to be done, for example, when renewable energy is available, when the energy price is lower, or when just other demands is low. The downside is that charge may not be completed for a spontaneous trip. So you may want to have a spontaneous trip and the charge is not yet started, for example. This solution seems indeed very promising, but it also on the assumptions that driver will prioritize the extended charging time, so smart charging options, whenever it's possible. However, when it comes to human, there is always an however, and that's why there are many psychology in the room and these conferences take place. The maximizations of smart charging use may not be a realistic representation of the actual use of smart charging. So although a variety of smart charging systems exist with different degrees of user involvement, in most cases, the potential of these systems intervene with individual assumptions and use of this technology. In other words, their charging strategy. Do they just want to have their car charged? Do they care about the energy mix of their charging? In case driver charging preference do not coincide with the smart charging maximizations assumptions, so if people choose habitually opt for immediate instead of smart charging, the technology has not significant benefits, which make very important to investigate driver charging decision making, their strategy they use. In doing that, in our research, we are particularly interested in the role of range concern in driver decisions to charge smartly. So previous research highlights that range concern is a major barrier to EV adoption, use, and charging. This means that if drivers are scared that the car is not charged enough, when they want to use it or will not cover the whole trip they plan to do, they may just focus on range-related information and overestimate the importance of such information. So we are not saying that range information are not important, but as you can see in this graph representing the commuting habits of European driver, they drive just a few kilometers in a working day. So except for Spain and Poland, EV owners drive less than 20 kilometers in a week, with an average of 5 kilometers in a working day. So is 5 kilometers a day. Moreover, they usually charge the car at a state of charge of battery that greatly exceeds what they would need So between 40 and 60%, that equals to 100 kilometer for most of the EV cars. And their car is parked for most of the day. These pieces of evidence suggest that there is no reason to prefer immediate charging over a smart option for the majority of drivers in everyday life. However, we expect range anxiety to bias driver decision process. Our first hypothesis is that individuals unnecessarily allocate a lot of importance in the state of charge at the moment of charging their EV, which may be very problematic for maximizing smart charging potential, as we just discussed earlier. So we try further to investigate ways to reduce this bias. Specifically, we were interested in the role that choice architecture can play in the context of smart charging. The idea behind choice architecture intervention is that the way information is provided affects the decisions. More specifically, we look at attribute translation tool. Would you most probably take a medicament that has 10% of death incidence, or one that have 90% of survival rate? The idea is that the same information can be expressed in very different ways, which are perceived differently and result in different choices. The energy domain is plenty of examples where information are not well understood, which bias the decisions that people made. So if individuals are provided with more comprehensive translations of this information, bias can be corrected. When deciding on charging, individuals may find difficult to use their percentage of battery to estimate, because they need to estimate the available range that this percentage stands for and compare it with their own driving demand. So they end up relying only on the percentage to estimate the urgency to charge. So is 25% low or not? What if I say that it corresponds to more than 100 kilometers? In our experiment, we tested whether translating the charging state, the state of charge of battery information, increased the choice of charge smartly. So we also expect driving habits to moderate these effects. So let's see how we tested our hypothesis. We had a 2x3 within between subject design. In wave 1, that were our baseline, we asked some driving-related questions that we use either as control variable or as screening criteria. So, for example, we wanted to know, as you see in these in the left box, we wanted to know whether they were interested in the system in the first place, and only who was interested participated in the scenario basis. So this is the charging scenario. But the core of our study were these charging scenarios. So each time they had 21 trials, and each time they had, so for each of these trials, they did a charging decision. At baseline phase, everyone got the same trials. Only at the second experimental phase, they were randomly allocated to one of the 3 conditions. The control conditions was exactly the same as the charging scenario in the baseline phase. And regarding the translation conditions, all the curiosity just a little bit more. We will see them in a minute. So we are working at the University of Geneva, but we run the study on prolific with UK respondents. That's also why we report the results in miles and not kilometer. So let's first illustrate the charging scenario. We had actually several steps to introduce this charging scenario. So we wanted to make sure that they understood this concept, that at first look that they are not easy. So we presented EV, we presented smart charging systems, and we asked to respondents to envisage having both an EV and smart charging system installed. We explained that they had to configure their preference, so they will be asked to decide the type of charge they want based on the information provided at the different conditions. So we further described all the different attributes that actually define each of the charging scenario. And as you can see in the demo, we had, so that each charging scenario was described by the initial state of charge of the car, the time of the day, the increase of renewable energy if smart charging was used, as well as the additional time that could eventually take smart charging and the price savings that would offer smart charging. Just to make sure, like, we presented them more deeply before we asked them to go with these decisions. So the demo continue with a couple of more example, but this is our control condition and the baseline phase. I work the same. Regarding the translation, in our tailored conditions, we provide the additional information. So the main charging scenario was the same, but we add the additional information about how many typical working day they can cover with the battery level available. We computed, so we tailored for each of the respondents as we computed the number of days by dividing the available range for each of the charging scenario by the driving habits people have. We indeed asked earlier in the survey how much they drive in a working day. We also control for miles, the example I made it before. So in these conditions, we specified how many miles corresponds to the state of charge of the battery, so the battery level. We used the baseline phase to test our first hypothesis, and we found the state of charge received very high importance, and on average, participants decided to use smart charging in 65% of the choices, a little bit more. Considering what we discussed earlier, it could have been be close to 100%. So it not only validate our first hypothesis, it gives high potential for improvement. What changed in wave 2, let's see that. At the first look, respondents choose more to charge smartly. We ran a multi-level logic regressions analysis to see what accounts for this increase. So in the control conditions, the odd ratio is close to 0, as you can see in the graph. It's 0.98, meaning that respondents at wave 1 and 2 had similar probability to choose smart charging or to choose smart charging. However, at the mice condition, the odd ratio is positive. Respondents choose more frequently to charge smartly. We got same and even stronger results for the Taylor conditions. So they were these results. The result for Taylor conditions was still significant when demographic and driving habits were added in the model, whereas for the mice condition it was not. This means that our intervention was significant, and the translations help respondents to understand the state of charge information. They attributed less importance to this information and choose more frequently to charge smartly. We, as I briefly mentioned, we also hypothesized that driving pattern moderate the facts we found. We hypothesized that understanding these informations may affect differently the charging strategy of individuals that drive just a few miles a day or long distances, and that was the case. So let me guide you through the results visualized in this graph. If we look at the control conditions on the left, we see that people that drive just a few miles a day, the black bar, allocate to state of charge information slightly higher importance than individuals that drive longer distances every day. So the gray bar. This kind of doesn't make any sense. So for people who drive a few miles a day, the possibility to run out of charge is very small. So if they would have understood what it means, they should not have given so much relevance to this attribute. When we look at Taylor condition, instead, we see that the bar are flipped. So according to our hypothesis, individuals better understood this info when expressed in the Taylor information. So when we express it as how many days they can drive, they can still drive without charging. So the importance of the attribute is much lower for individuals who drive less. So this is mostest if you compare for people that drive longer distance, the importance allocated is the same. What change is the importance allocated to the drivers that drives a few kilometers or miles a day. So it means that they better understood these informations and they understood that in the end is not that relevant. They can go for smart charging without not worry about range information much. Yeah, and we see not much of the difference for people that drive a lot because for them, range availability is very important as they need to guarantee for their next trip. So it makes sense that it's still kind of a relevant attribute. Just to conclude, so overall, individuals seems interested in smart charging. However, they seems to have some biases in their decision making, and choice architecture interventions seems to be effective on correct for these biases, and so they are powerful instrument for policymakers. However, the main take-home for policymaker, at least on my perspective, is to always keep in mind that the use of technology, even for low-carbon option, has a huge impact on the system. So the job is not done by only incentivize the wide adoption of such technology. It is equally essential to monitor what happens when these technology are adopted. So thank you very much for listening to me. I'm happy to answer any the question you may have for me.
Thank you, Maria, for your presentation. Thank you very much on behalf of everybody. Let us see. Any questions for Maria? I'm checking now the chat before I say anything. I can ask you one very simple thing, Maria, as we get the questions from the audience. I noticed that in your experiment, when you have this introduction text, as far as I remember, I read something about the text referring to charging electric vehicles in an uncoordinated or a smart way. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I wonder if you think that these texts could have primed or influenced the respondents in the way that they actually reacted to your experiment. After all, one could argue that we all like smart things and we all do not like uncoordinated things. So do you have any reflections upon that?
So it's so the first easy answer I have is that no matter what the bias we may have done with our manipulations, we still see a difference amongst conditions that is actually kind of makes us feeling confident about the effects we saw. A more sophisticated answer is that maybe. But in the descriptions we made, we actually emphasize much more on the benefits of both options. So I don't have specifically the text in mind, but we kind of said, because it's when you have the smart charging system installed, that's what you have. Is more a new choice of using it, the kind of smart options or not. And so we also, in the choice they made, we see that they have to make a decision between having the charge immediately done. That is very, very important to drivers, versus do it smart. So it kind of they both outlines different benefits.
I see.
Yeah. But it's very fascinating, and I mean, we can speak about it for
absolutely. Thank you for your answer, Maria. There are no more questions for this presentation. Thank you, Maria, again for your insights. Quite interesting, of course. Now it is time to move to the next speaker. Thank you, Maria. Is Dorothea Schaffner. Dorothea is a professor of economic psychology at the University of Applied Science and Arts, also located in Switzerland, where she lectures on consumer behavior, social psychology, and behavioral change interventions. Dorothea's research focuses on a variety of issues, including communication, digital media, sustainability, and of course, consumer behavior. Thank you, Dorothea. The virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Louis, for this very kind introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to share the results and insights of our research on energy-efficient cars. And I'm looking forward to present you some answers on the questions: what are the determinants to purchase energy-efficient cars in Switzerland, and thereby inviting you to a little virtual trip to this country. As all of you, I'm also not alone in my pursuit and in my research to answer these questions. I'm just representing a larger research team that is listed further below. Particularly, I'd like to mention Stephen Bugin, who has been helping me with putting together this particular presentation and looking into these specific determinants. Also, I'd like to thank the Swiss Federal Office of Energy, who has been supporting this research as part of a larger project, which was an evaluation of an actual campaign for lowering CO2 emissions in the sector of mobility. Well, let me continue and share with you the background of this research. So, we've heard before from Maria that energy efficient cars, in particular in her research, electric vehicles could contribute significantly to a reduction of CO2 emissions. But what we observe is that the market penetration is still very low. So for this research that I'm presenting you, you need to consider that we have a little bit of a broader background here, so it's less specific. And when we talk about energy efficient cars, we're not only looking into electric vehicles, as you see the pictures here, but we also look into cars that just have smaller amounts of CO2 emissions and that are running under the label A or B according to the Swiss Energy label categorization. So what's the background? I think we've seen that very well also in Uta's presentation. Generally, people, consumers are very positive towards renewable energy, towards sustainability, and also towards more sustainable forms of transportation. But what we find is that the market penetration is very low. So, for example, in Switzerland, the last year numbers would show us that we have 4% of newly bought cars are energy efficient. So it's a very, very small amount. Also, we can observe that these numbers are rising, but still they are at a very, very low level. So the question was, I was driving this whole research is how can we promote energy efficient cars to consumers? And in our research, we were mainly focusing on what has been called earlier today psychological factors that determine the intention to purchase energy efficient cars. Of course, we are not the first ones that look into this type of questions. So we have previous research that has already focused on finding out what drives people to purchase electric cars mainly. So most of the research is focusing on this type of innovative new cars that is more energy efficient. Also, what we found in our literature research is that most of this research is based on a psychological theory that might be familiar to some of you, which is called the theory of planned behavior, that differentiates, on the one hand, between attitudes, which is the most prominent factor and also has been found in empirical studies to be the most important factor to explain intentions and actual purchase behavior. But what also previous studies found that there is a gap between attitudes and intentions, so that we have positive attitudes, as I've mentioned in the introduction, and then on the other hand, very low purchase behaviors. So other factors are needed to explain intentions and behaviors. And these factors are, on the one hand, subjective norms, or normative factors, such as what do other people believe is the correct behavior? Is my behavior appreciated by people that I like and that are my peers? And then another factor is perceived behavior control. So factors such as, can I afford this type of car? Is it possible to buy these cars? And what we have heard about in detail in the previous talk, how can I charge, for example, electric vehicles? These are all compound into this psychological factor of perceived behavior control, in a sense of, can I really do, if I'm intending to do it, can I am I capable to drive by and charge an energy efficient car? Now, we have, as previous studies have found, used as our conceptual model an extended version of the theory of planned behavior. Since in previous studies, researchers have found that emotions are a very important predictor of purchase intentions. So, is it fun to drive these cars? Also, we included a factor that is super important when we discuss cars, which is social status. So in many countries, previous research has found that prestige is attached to cars. So it matters what car I'm owning. And so we included this in our study. And of course, environmental concern. Also, we suspected this to be a positive factor determining purchase intentions for energy efficient cars. So we hypothesized that all these relations between those factors are generally positive. So let me just briefly give you a few insights in how we proceeded in order to answer the research question and to determine whether we can accept or have to reject our hypothesis. So we conducted a survey study using an online panel in Switzerland. We screened our participants for being involved in decision processes of buying a new car, at least in the last 3 years. The sample consisted of roughly 500, 600 participants, as I mentioned, recent or prospective car buyers. We measured the before mentioned constructs using questions that have been used in previous research to determine these psychological factors. A quick note on the sample that was involved here. So we have more men than women in our sample, which is also representative of the question whether you're involved in the decision, since we know from other research that it's more often a decision that's been taken by men, even if we're speaking about households. We also see that we have older sample here, which also corresponds with the demographics of typical car buyers. These are usually older than the average population of Switzerland. And I will just jump through the results of this online study. So you can see here again our conceptual model, and green indicates whether we can accept the hypothesis, whether we find the proposed relationships, and red indicates that we have to reject the hypothesis based on the findings of our online survey. So let me first give you a quick explanation on the hypothesis that we can accept. So as in previous studies, we find that attitudes are a strong predictor of purchase intentions. No news here, just the confirmation of previous studies. What we also find is that norms, so what other people think, what other people esteem as to be correct behavior, seems to influence purchase intentions for energy efficient cars to a certain amount. It's less important, but also there is some importance to explain purchase intentions. Then, to our big surprise, we did not find a simple relationship between the factor of perceived behavior control and purchase intentions. So this puzzled us. So we dug in to find out what's the reason. So and what we found is that our measure of perceived behavior control could be differentiated in two separate factors. So we find one factor that consists of the perception of energy efficient cars being safe, practical, easy to use, and another factor that is concerned with price perception. And again, to our surprise, we find a positive relationship. That's not so much the surprise part here, a positive relationship between purchase intentions and these classical perceptions of energy efficient cars being practical and safe. But we do not find the relationship between price perceptions. So it doesn't matter whether these people think energy efficient cars are cheaper or more expensive, there is no significant relationship. Just a quick anecdote, this was very important also for the Swiss Federal Office of Energy, because in their original campaign put a lot of effort in communicating about prices and that energy efficient cars are cheaper if you use them. This seems to be an avenue that's not very promising to promote energy efficient cars. Also, to our surprise, we do not find any relationship, any significant relationship between emotions, prestige status, and environmental concern. Interestingly, here, I just quickly want to mention that similarly to Uta's research, we do not have a strong relationship here. We're not finding a relationship at all between environmental concern and purchase intentions. And probably we also finding ourselves as researchers here in a bubble of our own mindsets, considering that probably sustainability seems to be something which is important to us, but seems to be of lesser importance to the general public. But this is just a hypothesis from my side to explain this missing relationship between environmental concern and purchase intentions. Okay, so I'm moving on just briefly to the discussion part. So particularly important to explain the adoption of energy efficient cars we're finding in our research is positive attitudes and social norms. As all other research, we also are aware that our approach has some limitations. In particular, we've just conducted a survey study. We need to, if you want to study real behavior, of course, field studies would be of much larger ecological validity. And also, what's probably problematic that we look into a very generic class of cars. So we include electric vehicles, but we also include the normal combustion engine as well as hybrid cars, which could lead to a confusion of the results. Anyway, Despite these limitations, I think we can derive a couple of recommendations for practitioners that are in the field to promote energy efficient cars. So still, and as always, positive attitudes, generating positive attitudes, addressing knowledge as well about energy efficient cars seems to be the most promising avenue for promoting this type of cars. And also interesting is that social influence seems to be important for energy efficient cars. So it matters what other people think about my car. So collective actions, opinion leaders, influencers, or reference groups should be used in order to promote energy efficient cars. And one example could be found, for example, that Mercedes uses Roger Federer as an opinion leader or influencer to promote their electric car. And with this example, I'm concluding my presentation. I thank you for the attention, and I'm excited to hear your questions.
Thank you, Dorothea, for your presentation. I'm getting already questions for you. The first one comes from Magnus Roos. He says, subjective norm in theory of planned behavior is equal social norm, which includes social status. What is your comment on that?
Exactly. Thank you for this comment. We decided to look at the status variables separately. I didn't go into that detail because when we combine the two, we are not finding they're not loading on the same factor. So there seems to be a difference between the social norm as defined, what other people would appreciate concerning my behavior of buying energy efficient cars, and the social status that is connected to energy efficient cars. So there seems to be a different perception, and this factor needs to be differentiated.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer, Dorothea. I have two more questions for you. The other one is from Elizabeth. She asked, it would be great if you could shortly say again how you defined energy efficient cars, those performing well on the Swiss car label. And then she asked about whether other alternatives, such as electric cars, were also mentioned or not. And if so, is there a way to separate the results on this regard?
Could you say that the second part of the question again? Sorry.
The second part of the question, I repeat the whole question. The question to Dorothea. It would be great if she could shortly say again how they define energy efficient cars. I think that relates to the footnote that you have in one of your slides. Then, but were alternatives such as electric cars also mentioned or not? If so, if there is a way to separate the results in this regard. Yes, correct. I think that is probably the footnote that you have on that slide, the definition about efficient cars that she might be asking for.
Yeah, it basically boils down to the 95 grams per CO2, 95 grams of CO2 per kilometer. I think there are other variables involved, but since my background is not in the area of these sustainability parameters, I would have to direct you to the website of the Swiss label, which I'm happy to provide over the chat function after the discussion. Unfortunately, we do not have a chance to differentiate between different types of cars. So and energy efficient cars, that would have been very interesting to see here the differences also in perceptions. And also I would agree, I think you're suggesting that we probably have different relationships with prestige and social status when we look, for example, into a Tesla as an electric car, as compared to the smaller version of combustion engine cars with that where obviously the prestige factor doesn't is not important. So definitely this is a shortcoming of our research, and would be a great avenue for further research to have more details on these different types.
There are more questions coming for you, Dorothea. I will take the last one because obviously we need to leave some time for our next speaker, but I will have to shoot. So I apologize for here to the audience for not choosing some of the questions. I picked the one posed by Marcus. I know that he's also in Switzerland. So he says, no role of price perception on purchase intention. He says, welcome to Switzerland. Incidentally, that is what we have found in our study in Switzerland as well. However, could another reason be that your participants wanted to buy a car anyway, which means that they had a high reference point?
Thank you, Marcus, for pointing this out. We've been discussing this also with our with the funding agency, and exactly they were addressing this as a problem that in Switzerland we have very high researches or resources, and also very high purchase power, and therefore pricing and prices and also subsidies do not influence purchase intention so much. So thank you for pointing this one out. And what was the second part? Remind me briefly.
However, could another reason be that your participants wanted to buy a car anyway, which means that they had a high reference point?
Yes. Thank you also for pointing this out. This is an interesting idea. Unfortunately, we don't have the data to confirm this, but probably this could be an interesting explanation. So thank you for pointing this out. And also for the other questions, if you posted them on the chat function, I can try to answer them.
From Uta is on the chat function, but I think that I need to move on. The 12 o'clock is approaching fast, and obviously we have one last speaker. So thank you, Dorothea, once again for your presentation and contribution. Very much appreciated.
Thank you too. Thank you for the questions.
So now it is time for our next speaker, Magnus Roos. He's a senior researcher at the Center for Consumer Research at the University of Gothenburg here in Sweden. Jon holds a PhD in psychology, and he just finished a 2-year project at Chalmers University of Technology, also located here in Sweden, where he looked into factors that influence mobility services, in particular car sharing. In this project, he worked together with Frances Spray, who is co-author to this paper and presentation. So, Jon, thank you very much for your participation. The virtual floor is yours.
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you, previous speaker, for very interesting topics that relate a lot to what we are doing in Gothenburg in Sweden. So I would like to be happy to discuss with you later on. What I will present today is just a small part of what we have collected data about. The title of the presentation is Determinants of Car Sharing, Self-Efficacy. And as Louis started this track today, he said that it is some concepts here that need to be explained. 2 concepts. The first one, car sharing. I agree with Uta that most of you probably know what car sharing is about. But we have 2 different kinds of car sharing services. It's station-based and free-floating. What we have looked into this study and what is most popular in Sweden is station-based car sharing. just clarify that, because it might be different findings if you investigate free floating and self-efficacy. And the psychological concept here, or a social psychological concept, self-efficacy, it is a person's belief of being in control and manage a specific situation. And that concept was first launched by Bandura. And the theory in this presentation is very simple, I should say, or it's a simple model. It is quite complex to understand, probably, but it is related to self-efficacy. And according to Bandura, it is 4 different factors that influence how much people believe that they are in control of a specific happening. And the first one is your own experiences. And that is what have been known in psychology for a very long time. And Piaget, for instance, said that all our what we believe about our control and our future experiences, all based about our own previous experiences. But Bandura said that that is just one of 4 parts of it. We can also observe others, the second factor here. And if other people that are similar to ourselves are managed to have control in a certain situation, then we also believe ourselves that we can manage it. And the third factor here, persuasions from others. If other people believe that we can control the situation, if they believe in us, then it can also give us self-efficacy. And the fourth factor, emotional arousal. If we know that we are emotional stable, that our mood is not going up and down, then we can also exclude that factor related to emotions in a moment, because we know that we will be the same. And yeah, if we are more emotional stable, then we have higher belief that we can control a specific situation. So that is the theoretical framework. And the purpose of this study is to explain if the 4 factors can explain car sharing efficacy. And then it's one hypothesis for each one of the 4 factors. The first one is experience of car sharing. If you have your own experience of car sharing, influence car sharing self-efficacy. Observation of others, influence car sharing self-efficacy. Social persuasion, influence car sharing self-efficacy. And finally, emotional arousal, influence car sharing self-efficacy. So this is, what we would like to test. And of course, you wonder how we measure this. As we have seen also previous presentations here, it is difficult to measure concepts like emotion, social status, and so on. But we have used here 1,078 citizens in Gothenburg, second largest city in Sweden, the West Coast. We have used citizens from certain kind of houses that are designed for car sharing or for reducing car use. So it's few car parks, but instead you have access, and it's included in the rent in many of the buildings. So it's the houses that is designed for promoting car sharing, station-based car sharing. 275 responses, about 25% of the people that received this survey answered the question. And among the 275, 204 are car drivers. We are only interested in this study to look into people that drive car, because it's so much differences between car drivers and people in other people that are not decided to not drive car or not able to drive car, whatever. So we are only interested in car drivers. 70 of the car drivers have previous experience of car sharing. So it's not so many of them, 70 of 204. And we can see that our sample here is a little bit overrepresented by males. 112 persons are males. And the average age is a little bit younger than the Swedish average age, 40 years. And for measuring car sharing self-efficacy, we used this single item question. Indicate on the line below how certain it is that you can fulfill all your needs of a car with car sharing. And then we measure here for each millimeter. So the scale, they put they put their across where they want on the scale, and we have measured it from the paper or from the web design. And the scale ranges from 0 to 100. And the independent variables, experience of car sharing is measured by, do you have experience? Simple question, do you have experience in car sharing? Yes or no. It's a dummy variable. The other three are measured on a 7-point scale. Observation of others. Most of my acquaintances use car sharing. Social persuasion, car sharing use is perceived as something positive among my friends and acquaintances. Emotional arousal, I would feel stressed if I used car sharing services. So if the answer 1, the lowest on this scale, then they do not agree to the statements. And if the answer 7, they agree completely. So I hope you're curious about the results. We found that experience of car sharing is not influencing car sharing self-efficacy. Observation of others are also not influencing. Social persuasion is influencing. And emotional arousal is influencing. So if we feel stressed about car sharing, then we use it, then we don't believe that it will fulfill all needs we have from a car. So only 2 of the 4 factors are influencing self-efficacy. Of course, from this simple study, it's a lot of things to discuss. Social support is important for self-efficacy in transport behavior. That is something that we know from previous research. And from presentations today, we also see that social support is important. Experience from car sharing is measured through a binary question. Of course, it would be interesting, and we have the opportunity to do that later on, to look into what kind of experience. Is it positive, negative? For how long time have the users had experience? Is it just for a few weeks, or is it for many years? Conclusions. What influenced the belief that car sharing fulfill all needs of cars are social support and emotional arousal. So it is what other people believe and think, and it is related to how stressed we feel when we think about car sharing. That is the conclusion. And experiences of car sharing does not influence car sharing self-efficacy. That is very interesting. That is something to really take into consideration for all actors that are designing car sharing services. Because if previous experiences, even if it's measured by a simple question, is not influencing if people believe that they can fulfill their needs with a car, it is something that needs to be redesigned or at least taken into consideration. What is the implications here, or what can we do from this simple study, or how should we move on? And I think even if it's a quite easy survey with single item questions and dummy coded variables and so on for experience, it still tells us something that people that have used car sharing in Gothenburg in Sweden here, they don't believe that they can fulfill all their needs with a car from car sharing, more than people that haven't tried the services. So that is, I think, the main takeaway from this, and to further investigate how it comes. So I think I just end there, and I'm happy to hear your questions and comments on this.
Thank you, John. Tack så jättemycket for your presentation. Questions from the audience. I will go and check the chat here. While we wait for questions to come in, Mark, John, can I ask you just one, you might say, semantic or theoretical question? And this relates a little bit to what Uta mentioned in the beginning of her presentation about routine-seeking people. I don't know if you heard that the more oriented people are to routines, perhaps the less appealing car sharing is. So that kind of got stuck in my mind. So I wonder, whenever consumers decide to join or would like to join a car sharing scheme, they are by default giving up certain level of self-efficacy, certain level of control, certain level of management, because that is no longer up to them. You know, there is an organization, there are other users as well. So can you comment on that, perhaps tension between the use of self-efficacy in sharing schemes in general, or perhaps there is no tension whatsoever? It's just a reflection that I have.
Yeah, I agree with you that in one way, people, when they give up to own a car or to try these services, then they will be less control over it. But on the other hand, people that are first movers or early adopters, they might have a higher degree of self-efficacy in themselves, because they are they would like to try, or they are able to try, or I'd say. But I think we need to include more variables in this analyze, and we are doing that. This is just a very small part. We are also measuring personality traits and things, and openness in the big five is very much related to what you said. If you would like to prefer old routines, or if you think new, openness to new experiences. So that will come later on. So I'm not sure if I have so much more to say about that right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have questions from Maria. She says, as the emotional arousal was significant, do you think that positive emotions might as well play a role?
Yes, I think also it's always difficult to operationalize theories, social psychology to easy survey questions. So I'm not sure if we measure emotional arousal in a very good way here when we ask if the respondents feel, or to what degree they agree with, if they feel stress when they think about car sharing. But we have also measured emotional arousal related to owning a car, and that is then people feel less. That people that feel stress for car sharing, they feel less stress when they think about owning. So that's kind of more positive arousal to adapt positive affect.
A very brief follow-up question on this. When did you do this study. I'm just wondering whether COVID-19, for instance, could have had any impact. I mean, sharing a car that has been previously used by somebody else perhaps might trigger these emotions about the acceptance or preferences for sharing.
Yeah.
So just a curiosity there.
Yes, thanks for that question. Just before COVID-19.
Okay.
So we did follow up. We received more findings for measuring what happened with COVID-19 related to this.
Thank you. Uta says, very nice presentation. The question, what does the last sentence from your conclusion mean? Inability to fulfill the needs of what?
The needs of all needs of cars, that can be social needs, that can be status, that can be to transport yourself from A to B. So that can be so many different things. So that's up to the respondents to what kind of needs. And that is something that we also measure more specific, compare different needs of car sharing and the owning car.
Okay. Thank you, John. A comment from Maria. Thanks, John. Self-efficacy is a very intriguing concept. I think that we can all argue with that.
Yeah.
Okay, I have here 12 past 12, so we are obviously over time, but I hope this was not really a major problem for anybody. Obviously, it has been quite interesting to have all the speakers, all the presentations. There were quite a lot of complementarities or synergies between the research being presented today. I hope everybody enjoyed this session despite the limitations or the challenges imposed by the reason we are all very familiar with. This has been all from my side. I hope, again, you enjoyed the session. Thanks again, the most important thing. Thanks again to Dorothea, Maria, Uta, and John for your contributions. And I look forward to see you virtually during the remaining part of the conference. So thank you very much, and regards from Lund University. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.